Think about the last time your organization made a major technology decision. Not a small one, a real one. A decision that involved multiple stakeholders, multiple vendors, multiple conversations about what the business actually needed. Now ask yourself, how much of that conversation was about the technology itself? And how much of it was about untangling what you already had? Because in most organizations I talk to, the hardest part of moving forward isn't choosing the right solution. It's understanding the environment you're already living in. The layers of decisions that made sense at the time. The systems that were added for good reasons by good people without anyone asking how they'd fit with everything else. That's not a technology problem. That's a leadership problem. And it's one of the most common and most underestimated challenges facing organizations today. Welcome to the Insight-Driven CIO Podcast. I'm Mark Søndergaard, Channel Chief and VP of Sales at EnTelegent Solutions. This podcast explores the leadership decisions that shape technology and the business outcomes they create. Because technology changes constantly, leadership doesn't. Here's something I've noticed across organizations of every size and every industry. Technology rarely becomes difficult because of one bad decision. Complexity usually develops over years. Organizations grow, priorities shift, acquisitions happen. Teams make good decisions independently. Decisions that solve real problems, meet real deadlines, serve real business needs. And then, over time, those decisions accumulate. Without a unified strategy connecting them, without a shared picture of where everything fits, the environment becomes harder to understand, harder to support, and harder to optimize. And here's the part that I think gets missed in most of these conversations. The people who built that complexity weren't doing anything wrong. They were doing their jobs. They were solving problems. They were responding to what the business needed at the time. The complexity wasn't the result of poor leadership. It was the unintended consequence of good leadership operating without a common framework. That distinction matters. Because if you walk into a conversation about complexity assuming someone made a mistake, you're going to spend your energy looking for blame. And blame doesn't simplify anything. Let me tell you about an organization I worked with that understood this the hard way. On the surface, they look like a well-run company. Solid leadership team, healthy growth, a technology environment that had expanded significantly over the years, through organic growth, a couple of acquisitions, and the kind of incremental additions that happen when a business is moving fast. When we first started working together, they told me their biggest challenge was managing too many technology vendors. That was the presenting problem. Too many vendors, too many contracts, too much complexity in the vendor relationships. So we started digging, and what we found wasn't a vendor problem at all. What we found was that every department in that organization had been making technology decisions independently for years. Not recklessly, thoughtfully. Each team had identified a need, evaluated options, and selected a solution that made sense for their function. Finance had its tools, operations had its tools, sales had its tools. IT was managing the infrastructure underneath all of it. Every individual decision was defensible. Every one of them had a legitimate business reason behind it. But together, they had created an environment that nobody fully understood. There was no single place where anyone could see the complete picture. No shared inventory of what existed, what it cost, what it was for, and how it connected to everything else. When we started asking those questions, basic questions really, the answers were scattered across departments, buried in old emails, living in the memory of people who had since moved on. The challenge wasn't the number of vendors. The challenge was that the organization had been growing without a shared technology strategy. Every team was optimizing for its own outcomes. Nobody was optimizing for the whole. And the result was an environment that was genuinely difficult to manage. Not because it was poorly built, but because it had never been built as a whole. It had been assembled, piece by piece, over years, by people who were each doing exactly what they were supposed to do. When we reframed the conversation that way, when we stopped talking about vendor consolidation and started talking about executive alignment, everything changed. The leadership team stopped looking for someone to blame and started asking a different question. How do we build a shared picture of where we are so we can make better decisions about where we're going? That shift in framing was the beginning of real progress. That story stays with me because it captures something I see constantly. Complexity isn't usually a sign that something went wrong. More often, it's a sign that something went right, that the organization grew, that teams were empowered to solve problems, that the business moved fast enough to outpace its own documentation. The problem isn't the complexity itself. The problem is when complexity becomes invisible, when it accumulates to the point where no one has a clear picture of the whole environment, and decisions start getting made on incomplete information. And here's the leadership lesson I take from that story. Technology reflects how an organization makes decisions. If decisions are made in silos, even good decisions, even well-intentioned decisions, the technology environment will reflect that. It will be fragmented. It will be difficult to explain. It will be harder to optimize than it needs to be. If decisions are made with a shared strategy, with a common understanding of where the organization is going and how technology supports that journey, the environment will reflect that too. It will be more coherent, more manageable, more aligned with what the business actually needs. The technology doesn't create the complexity. The decision-making culture does. And that means simplification isn't a technology project. It's a leadership initiative. Here's the first thing I want you to take away from this. Complexity is created one good decision at a time, when those decisions aren't connected by a common strategy. This is important because it changes how you approach the problem. If complexity is the result of bad decisions, the solution is better decision-making. But if complexity is the result of good decisions made in isolation, the solution is alignment. It's creating the shared framework that connects individual decisions to a common direction. That's a different conversation. It's a harder conversation in some ways because it requires bringing people together across functions and asking them to think about the whole, not just their piece of it. But it's also a more productive conversation, because it doesn't start with blame. It starts with a shared recognition that the environment you have today is the result of the decisions that got you here. And the environment you want tomorrow requires making decisions differently. The second insight builds directly on that. Simplification isn't about reducing technology. It's about reducing unnecessary complexity so technology better serves the business. I want to be careful here because I think this gets misunderstood. When organizations start talking about simplification, there's often an assumption that the goal is to have less, fewer vendors, fewer tools, fewer solutions. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes there are redundancies that genuinely need to be eliminated. But that's not the point of simplification. The point is clarity. The point is ensuring that every solution in the environment has a clear purpose, a clear owner, and a clear connection to a business outcome. An organization with 50 well-understood, well-managed solutions is simpler, in the ways that matter, than an organization with 20 solutions that nobody can fully explain. Simplification is about understanding, and understanding is a leadership responsibility. That leads to the third insight. Organizations don't need fewer solutions. They need greater clarity about how those solutions work together to achieve business outcomes. This is the shift I want technology leaders to think about. Not just how do we reduce what we have, but how do we build a shared understanding of what we have and why we have it? Because when that clarity exists, a lot of things get easier. Vendor conversations become more strategic. Budget conversations become more grounded. Technology decisions become faster because they're being made against a clear picture of the environment rather than a fragmented one. And here's what I've seen happen when organizations invest in that clarity. The conversation between IT and the business changes. It stops being a conversation about technology and starts being a conversation about outcomes. about what the business needs to accomplish and how the technology environment supports that. That's the conversation technology leaders want to be having. And it becomes possible when the environment is understood well enough to explain. And that brings me to the one thing I want you to carry out of this episode. Complexity is a leadership challenge expressed through technology. Sit with that for a moment. The complexity in your environment isn't a technology problem waiting for a technology solution. It's a reflection of how your organization has been making decisions. And the path to a simpler, more manageable environment runs through leadership, through alignment, through shared strategy, through the discipline of connecting individual decisions to a common direction. The organizations that manage complexity well aren't the ones with the simplest environments. They're the ones where leadership has made a deliberate choice to understand the environment they have and to make decisions that build toward the environment they want. That's not a technology achievement. It's a leadership achievement. I want to leave you with one question. Not a rhetorical one, a real one, worth taking back to your leadership team. If your organization stopped buying new technology tomorrow, would your environment naturally become simpler over time? Or would today's complexity continue to make decisions harder? Because the answer to that question tells you something important. It tells you whether the complexity in your environment is being actively managed or whether it's just accumulating. And if it's accumulating, the solution isn't to stop buying technology. The solution is to build the shared understanding and the executive alignment that allows your organization to make decisions that simplify rather than compound. That work starts with leadership. It always does. Thanks for listening to the Insight-Driven CIO Podcast. I'm Mark Søndergaard. Until next time, technology changes constantly. Leadership doesn't.